Kassia shrugged out of her ermine-lined cloak, folded it carefully, and laid it across the saddle in front of her. It was much too beautiful to wear, she thought with a smile, remembering her father's sly looks when he presented it to her on her last birthday. She had teased him that it was a gift for a princess, and not a simple maid living in the wilds of Brittany. As for her nurse and maid Etta, she had tisked behind her hand, claiming the master was spoiling her baby, but Maurice had only laughed. Kassia raised her face to the brilliant sun. It was a beautiful spring day, white clouds dotting the blue sky, and air so pure and clean she couldn't seem to breathe deeply enough. She turned slightly in her saddle and looked back toward Belterre. 4 round towers rose high to guard the surrounding countryside. Thick grey stone walls, aged to mute grace over the last 100 years, connected the huge towers, forming a large square atop the rocky hillock. Belterre was not only her home, but also a strategic fortress commanding the river Morlaix. No enemy could sail from the sea up the river without the soldiers of Belterre knowing of it. And no enemy could escape detection landward, no matter how stealthily they tried, for the castle commanded the highest hill in the area. As Kassia gazed beyond the thriving town of Morlaix toward the sea, she remembered the stories her father had told her of the violent past, when powerful men had fought to gain control of Brittany. Belterre had survived, for even the stoutest war machines had faltered and failed before they could draw close enough to harm Belterre with their flaming balls of fire. Siege was their only fear, and her father would remind them of it every year when the crops were safely stored. Kassia, every bit as fine a housekeeper as her grandmother had been, would ensure that the outbuildings were well stocked with wheat and fodder, the meat cured, and enough flour and salt purchased to withstand the forces of the King of France himself. Thomas, one of her father's squires, reined in beside Bluebell, drawing Kassia from her thoughts. "My lady," he said, pointing to the east, "a group of men is approaching. We should return to Belterre." She nodded, remembering her promise to her father, and urged Bluebell into a canter back to Belterre. She smiled, thankful that he would be home within the week, home with enough wine from Aquitaine to last him a decade. Pierre, the porter, raised the portcullis, and their small troop rode into the inner bailey. As always, Kassia felt a sense of accomplishment when she viewed the cleanliness of the outbuildings and the well-swept cobbled ground that slanted gently downward to the outer bailey so that rain could not collect and stagnate. There was no filth, no untidiness in her home, and all who lived within the keep were well fed and clothed in stout wool. A group of children were playing near the large well, and Kassia waved to them. They also were a part of her huge family, and she knew each of them by name. "We live in a rabbit warren," her father would complain with a smile. "Sometimes I cannot even relieve my bowels without someone about." "Thomas," she said, after he had helped her to dismount, "have Pierre close the gates until we know who our visitors are." "Yes, my lady," Thomas said, unable to entirely keep the worship from his voice. He was Kassia's age, and his father held sizable lands to the east, but he knew sadly that Kassia regarded him as a brother. It was just as well, he thought, turning to speak to Pierre, that he would win his spurs within the year. He did not think he could bear to be around when her father gave her in marriage to another man. "Damned whoreson," Pierre said, watching the dozen riders approaching Belterre. "It's that miserable Geoffrey de Lacy. I recognize his standard. It should be a weasel and not a proud eagle. How I'd like to tell the lout to keep his hide away from Belterre and my lady." "I will see what Kassia wishes," Thomas said. But Kassia had heard, and she called to him to open the gates. Geoffrey was her cousin, son of her father's sister Felice. Evidently his disagreeable mother had not accompanied him this time. Thank the saints for one small favor. If only her father were here. She climbed the wooden stairs to the outer wall and watched Geoffrey draw his small troop to a halt at the base of the hill. He was richly attired, as usual, in dark blue velvet, and she imagined that he had long before calculated the worth of Belterre. She chewed on her lower lip, wishing she could refuse him entry, but of course she could not.